Today I am visiting western Missouri and cemeteries in the communities of Richmond, Lee Summit, and Kearney. My first stop will be in the town of Richmond, Missouri at Pioneer Cemetery. This is a small cemetery that is dedicated to the Mormon pioneers who lived in the area before making their way farther west. The most prominent feature of the cemetery is the Pioneers Monument. It is here that Oliver Cowdery is resting. Cowdery is one of the three witnesses to the Book of Mormon, and he recorded the golden plates from which Joseph Smith is said to have translated the Book of Mormon. Located in the southwestern corner of the cemetery is a historical marker placed by the Ray County Historical Society. This marker is thought to be near the grave of Confederate guerrilla William T. Anderson. Bloody Bill, as he would be known during the Civil War, was a trusted member of Quantrill's Raiders. He was particularly ruthless when dealing with Union soldiers and Loyalists, and took a leading role in the massacre at Lawrence, Kansas, and at the Battle of Baxter Springs in 1863. On October 26, 1864, Bloody Bill was shot in the head by soldiers under the command of Colonel Samuel P. Cox. He was buried here in Pioneer Cemetery. While the actual location of his grave is thought to be unmarked, the small military stone is believed to mark the general location of his grave. From Pioneer Cemetery, I make my way to the west side of town and to the Richmond Cemetery. It is here that I find the grave of Bob Ford. Bob Ford is known as the man who shot Jesse James on April 3, 1882, while James was adjusting a picture on the wall of his St. Joseph, Missouri home. Following the killing of James, Ford was shunned as a traitor and moved to Creede, Colorado, where he operated a tent saloon. It was in Creede that Edward O'Kelly shot Ford with a double-barrel shotgun on June 8, 1892. Ford was originally buried in Creede, but his body was later relocated here, and his marker is inscribed, Bob Ford, the man who shot Jesse James. My final stop in Richmond was on the east side of town at the Richmond Memory Gardens. This is where I visit the grave of John Testrake. Captain Testrake was the pilot of TWA Flight 847 when it was hijacked on June 14, 1985 by Shiite militiamen while en route from Athens, Greece to Rome, Italy. He and the 145 passengers and crew were held hostage for more than 2 weeks. John Testrake died on February the 6th, 1996 from the complications of cancer. From Richmond, I make my way to the town of Lee Summit, Missouri, and the Lee Summit Historical Cemetery. It is here that we find the graves of outlaws James Cole and Bob Younger. Cole Younger was perhaps the best known of the Younger brothers. He was a member of Quantrill's Raiders during the Civil War and participated in the Lawrence, Kansas massacre in 1863. Following the Civil War, Cole and his brothers James and Bob joined Frank and Jesse James to form the famed James Younger Gang. For several years, the gang robbed banks throughout the Midwest, but the beginning of the end came on September 7, 1876, when they attempted to rob the bank in Northfield, Minnesota. The townspeople were waiting and killed Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell and wounded Bob Younger. The three Younger brothers were pursued, wounded, and eventually captured. All three of the Younger brothers pled guilty and were sentenced to life in prison. Bob Younger died in prison on September 16, 1889. Jim and Cole were paroled in 1901, and on October 19, 1902, Jim Younger committed suicide. Cole went on to write his memoirs and toured in a Wild West show with Frank James. The last surviving member of the famed James Younger Gang, Cole Younger, died on March 21st, 1916. From Lee's Summit, I made my way about 50 miles north and around the outskirts of Kansas City to the Muddy Forks Cemetery, where we find the grave of Clell Miller. During the Civil War, Clell Miller was a member of Bloody Bill Anderson's guerrillas and was captured during the raid in which Anderson was killed. He remained a prisoner for the remainder of the war and was released in April of 1865. Following his release, he joined the James Younger Gang. On September 7, 1876, Miller accompanied the James Younger Gang to Northfield, Minnesota, where they intended to rob the First National Bank. However, the townspeople were waiting, and during the ensuing shootout, Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell were killed. Miller's body was viewed and photographed and eventually buried in Northfield, Minnesota. A few years later, Miller's father claimed the body and had him buried here in the Muddy Forks Cemetery. From the Muddy Forks Cemetery, it was only about 6 miles east to the Jesse James Farm and Museum. Jesse James was born here in 1847, and at the age of 16 followed his older brother into the Civil War, where they fought with the likes of Captain William Quantrell and Bloody Bill Anderson. Following the war, Jesse and Frank returned home, and along with the brothers Cole, Bob, and Jim Younger, formed the famed James Younger Gang. For several years, the gang robbed banks throughout the Midwest, but it all came to an end when they attempted to rob the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. The townspeople were waiting, and two of the outlaws, Clell Miller and Bill Chadwell, were killed, and the Younger brothers were eventually captured. Frank and Jesse James managed to escape, and they lived quietly for a few years under assumed names. But in 1879, Jesse returned to Missouri, where he again took to his old ways of robbing banks. From time to time, he would visit his mother here at the farm, and when not visiting the farm, Jesse lived quietly under an alias in a home in nearby St. Joseph's. It was here, in his St. Joseph's home, that he was shot in the back by Bob Ford on April 3, 1882. His mother had him buried here, in the yard of the family farm. After the death of his mother and his wife, both named Zerelda, Jesse's body was moved from the farm to the Mount Olivet Cemetery, where he is resting today. My final stop of the day was at the Mount Olivet Cemetery in Kearney, Missouri, where Jesse James and his family are buried. Jesse was originally buried at the family farm, but upon the death of his wife and mother, his body was moved here, and he is resting today beside his wife and between his mother and stepfather. Dr. Reuben Samuels was the third husband of Zerelda James and was the stepfather of Frank and Jesse James. He was a quiet man who left behind a medical practice when he took up farming after he married Zerelda. Like his wife, Jesse's mother was named Zerelda. She was a powerful woman, standing nearly 6 feet tall, and was a staunch defender of her sons. Mrs. Samuels was returning on a train from visiting Frank near his home in Fletcher, Oklahoma, when she fell ill and died near Oklahoma City on February the 10th, 1911. Archie Samuels was the half-brother of Frank and Jesse James. On January the 26th, 1875, Pinkerton detectives looking for Frank and Jesse surrounded the James family farm and threw a makeshift bomb through the window. It exploded, killing 8-year-old Archie.